Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about the question we ask ourselves, am I the problem? It's a little rough. We've got a weird different angle going on, but I'm going to try my best to not look like a hot mess. Anyways, so am I the problem? Obviously, I can't answer if you actually are the problem. Like, I don't know the personal situation, but I think ultimately, if we're wondering, am I the problem? Well, there's probably some things that we're doing that we shouldn't be doing. And that's okay, because the whole point is that we want to be able to work on ourselves and nobody is perfect. So if I know I'm not perfect, I probably do some things that I shouldn't do. However, I want to caution you, because that does not mean that you are the problem. I think whenever there's any type of situation in life and it involves somebody else, it takes two people to have a dynamic. So ultimately, are you the problem? Like 100% of the time, all the time, are you a problem? Probably not. Probably not. But are you sometimes the problem? Yeah, I'm sure. The first thing that we have to look at is patterns. When it comes to patterns, these are very, very important to reflect on, because when you pick up patterns in your life, it has something to do with you. So if I'm in a relationship and every time I'm in a relationship, it ends with some big explosion, right? And either I cut the person off or the person cuts me off and it just ends. Odds are there's a reason why those relationships play out the same way every time. Now, one of my guesses is that if you're experiencing something like that, it's that there's either a lack of boundaries or a lack of communication. And so you have two people that are trying to be together, whether it's in a relationship or a friendship, but you have two people who are trying to make a dynamic work. And if it always ends in some heated explosion where, like I said, somebody gets cut off or it just ends very drastically, odds are there's a lot of resentment that's building up. And how does resentment build up? It means that either there's no communication and you kind of just let something go, let something go, let something go until you can't let it go anymore. And then there's this huge issue, or there's a lack of boundaries. Maybe you communicate, but you don't actually follow through on the boundary. You don't follow through on having some type of expectation or standard for each other. And so maybe it gets addressed and you communicate, but you don't follow through. And so eventually, again, it builds up, it builds up, it builds up. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. You don't do it. And then somebody just gets so frustrated that it comes to this explosion and people can't handle it anymore. And so then it ends. So that's one example of a pattern, but there are so many patterns, and it doesn't have to be relationships, like romantic relationships. It could be friendships. If you find that no matter what, you have a friendship and you always feel like, I don't know, like you meet people, but you can't get super close to them. It's like you have friends, but they're almost like acquaintances, or you think that the friendship is going to get closer and it never really does. And you feel like you can't find a best friend. Well, my thought would be there's probably something that's happening there that you're contributing that's not allowing people to connect to you. If it only happened once, like if you had a bad experience with one friend, then that's a one-time thing. Things happen. But like I said, if it's a pattern and you're noticing it over and over and over again, then odds are you are contributing to something that is making it difficult for the other person to have a healthy relationship with you. Okay. Another pattern is if you hear people saying something continuously about you. And I'm not talking like gossip or nonsense. I'm talking about the people in your life. So, for example, I have heard that I am an outspoken person that can sometimes just be too honest. And I used to kind of push that to the side and be like, well, honesty is the best policy. And if you can't handle it, it's because you have an issue or you have an insecurity or this or that. But when you hear somebody say the same thing multiple times, and I'm not just talking about one person, right? I'm talking about throughout my life, I've heard people say like, maybe you could think before you speak, or maybe you could have worded it in a different way, so it doesn't sound so critical. It doesn't sound so harsh. And once I sat back and reflected on that, I started to think, okay, there's some truth there. You can get your point across without being mean. Not that I was intentionally trying to be mean, but you have to think about who you're talking to. If it's somebody who is sensitive, if it's somebody who has difficulties communicating, if it's somebody who, they don't even have to be a sensitive person. Maybe it's just a sensitive topic. Like we all have things that are just difficult to talk about. So If you go straight into it with this idea of like, I'm just going to say what I want when I want, it's very off-putting to the other person, and it kind of leaves them at a defense. Or maybe it makes them feel like they're not comfortable having the conversation because of the way that you approach the conversation. So again, this goes to patterns. But even if it's not like a behavioral pattern, it could just be a pattern that you hear people saying. When something comes up multiple times, it's something that you need to work on. So we have our relationship patterns and the way that they end, or their behaviors in the first example. And then the second thing is just recognizing what other people say about you. Something else that I think is important, this would be the third thing, is picking up on your attachment styles. Now, this is like a whole different topic. There's this whole like your attachment styles, anxious, avoidant, all of these things. I'm not really getting into that, like what makes them different or how you identify, but just more paying attention to how do you respond to people? What is your attachment like? What I'm getting at in this is if you notice that you get anxious when people aren't around, if you notice that you overcompensate for people, if you notice that you pay more attention to their needs than your own needs, like these different attachments that we have or lack of boundaries, it's very important to think, how do I address this? Because ultimately, to have a healthy relationship, friendship, whatever, dynamic, to have a healthy dynamic, we have to be able to communicate, trust, and have separation, right? So if you notice that every time you get close to somebody, let's say you make a friend and you're just like, you go from being acquaintances to best friends automatically, or every time you get into a relationship, it goes from we just started talking to we're dating and I want to get married to this person, and when they don't answer me right away, I get anxious and nervous. You want to pick up on those attachment styles, because like I said, a secure attachment allows you to say, oh, they didn't answer right away. Maybe they're busy at work, or maybe they got a phone call, or maybe they're watching a movie and they're really into the movie and so they're not paying attention to their phone. Healthy attachments, secure attachments will allow you to be in a place that you can have a friendship or a dynamic where it doesn't rely on how quickly the person responds. It doesn't rely on if they're paying attention to you 24/7. It allows you to have a secure attachment and not be anxious whenever this person comes around. So you want to pay attention to your attachments. Okay, the next topic I am going to bring up, or next situation where you might be the problem and you really need to work on this, is if you're somebody who cannot take accountability. If you are somebody who, no matter what the situation is, you're like, no, it's their problem. They did this, they did that, this, that, this, that. No, it's them. You find yourself having a really hard time apologizing. Odds are there is a problem here, because like I said earlier, nobody is perfect. So if you don't ever find yourself apologizing, odds are you're just not paying attention to your behavior, or you're not taking it seriously, or you're not being responsible for yourself, and you're not taking accountability, because there's just no way you're going to convince me that you are never the problem, right? So it is very hard sometimes to admit when you're wrong. I get that. I struggle with it myself sometimes. Like if I really feel some type of way, or I'm like sure that it should have been done a certain way, I'm like, no, this makes sense, this, blah, blah, blah. And I lay it all out for people. And I can't hear what they're saying sometimes because I'm so much in my zone that I'm not really listening. I might be hearing what you're saying, but like I'm not listening to what you're saying. If you find yourself not really listening and you're always in your own zone and you always think you're right, you're not always right. I'm sorry, but you're not always right. I've had to deal with that. You have to deal with that. We all have to deal with that. So if people tell you like they feel like you never really take accountability, or you just notice in yourself, think back to all of your friendships, relationships. If you often look at a situation or argument you had with somebody and you're like, yeah, no, I didn't do anything wrong, and you say that every single time, you're probably doing something wrong. And I think it's very, very, very important to be able to take accountability for yourself. And accountability requires reflection, honest conversations with yourself, and honest conversations with the people around you. If you truly can't understand why you did something wrong or why you're at fault, have open conversations without being defensive, asking people, what did I do wrong? Can you explain it to me? Because I don't feel like I did anything wrong, but I see how upset and mad you are. And I know it's been an ongoing issue. This is something we continue to argue about. Like, please help me. And when you ask for help, you have to actually allow the help. So you have to be able to say, like, okay, I accept your help and I want to have this conversation without being defensive or rude or minimizing people. And I know this has been brought up throughout the video, but number 5, I would really say, is your boundaries. It's very, very hard to have healthy relationships if you don't have healthy boundaries. And boundaries is a very difficult topic. It comes up a lot in sessions. I've struggled with my own boundaries. It's a very common topic in therapy where setting boundaries feels like it sucks. You feel like you're going to hurt somebody or you're going to seem mean or like all of these different things. But we really, really need them. So if you're somebody who notices that you don't have boundaries, you probably create a lot of issues in your dynamics. And I hate saying that because I know so many people struggle with it, so I don't want it to just be like, yes, you are the problem, but it is something to reflect on. Why do I really struggle with setting boundaries, and how can I do a better job at it? Actually, on a side note, in my journal, because I think I told you guys I journal pretty often. Okay. The quote is, "You cannot pour out what you have not poured in." I bring that up when it comes to boundaries because if we're not taking care of our own needs and pouring into ourselves, meaning like allowing ourselves to engage in self-care, allowing ourselves to have space and time to reflect, process, work on ourselves. If we're not pouring into ourselves, we can't pour out, because you cannot pour out what you have not poured in. So you really, really need to pour into yourself and allow yourself to do all of these things and work on yourself in order to be able to pour out to other people. Meaning, if I work on my self-care, if I work on my boundaries, if I work on my attachment styles and being okay with being alone, if I allow people to come to me and say, you know what, you are a little too harsh, you need to learn how to be kinder. If I allow all these things to happen and I take the time to really fix that within me and align myself in myself in the way that seems right and love me, and I'm pouring all the energy into me, that allows me to then pour it into other people because I'm okay. But if I'm hurting and I'm angry and I'm upset or I feel sad and alone and just lost, it's really hard to help other people. How do you guide somebody when you don't know how to guide yourself? How do you help other people be accountable when you don't know how to be accountable for yourself? If you want somebody to show up in a relationship and be accountable for the way that they make you feel, shouldn't you also be accountable for the way that you make them feel? And how do we become accountable if we don't know how to reflect on ourselves and understand what we're doing in relationships that cause a problem? So allow yourself to pour into you and focus on you, and naturally you will have things to pour out onto others. That is, I guess, the flip side of this video is, even if there is a problem, like, how do you fix it? So that's how you fix it. You self-reflect, notice patterns, go to therapy if you need to, right? Like, obviously, I'm always going to say go to therapy. I'm a therapist. I believe in therapy. But if you don't believe in therapy, or you don't have insurance, or you don't want to spend the money, or whatever the case may be, like, go to somebody that you can really have some of these conversations with, because allowing yourself to have conversations allows you to brainstorm and process and get other perspectives. So going to therapy, working on communication, learning how to communicate better. So many issues in relationships all have to do with communication. So learn how to communicate better. All of these things that I'm talking about, they all connect to each other. So once you get one thing going, you'll get another thing going. If you're working on your communication, you're going to be better at setting boundaries. If you're better at setting boundaries, you're going to have more time to really reflect on yourself and be alone, than instead of always like enmeshed with somebody else and with them because you don't like being alone. The more that you have a secure attachment to yourself, the more that you're not going to be anxious about other people. Like, there's so many ways that they all intertwine. And so I don't want to overwhelm you and be like, you have to be able to do all of it. No, just start on one thing. Maybe your first thing is journaling, getting a journal and starting to reflect. And then as you reflect, you will find your next steps in the reflection, because you'll notice I'm writing a lot about how angry I get with other people. So maybe I need to work on my anger. I hope that that was helpful. And I guess I will see you in the next video. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. If you have any video ideas that you want to see, leave them in the comments, because this is a brand new channel and I assume eventually I'm going to run out of ideas. So I could really use help as this is going. Okay, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for your time, and I will see you next week.